If your job title disappeared tomorrow, would you still know who you are? I have spent years working with leaders who carry enormous responsibility and influence inside their organizations, and one pattern shows up again and again. Over time, the role slowly becomes their identity: the director, the partner, the vice president. Eventually, people stop introducing you by your name and start introducing you by your title. In this video, I want to explore a question most leaders never pause to ask. If your title vanished tomorrow, who would you be? Not what would you do? Who would you be? And more importantly, how do you build an identity that is bigger than the role you hold? Because the real danger in leadership is not losing the position. The real danger is when your identity becomes fused with it. Imagine this situation for a moment. You spent 15 or 20 years building your career. You delivered results. You solved difficult problems. You earned promotions. Your calendar fills quickly. Your decisions affect people. Your presence carries authority. From the outside, everything looks successful. But one day, the organization restructures. Not because you failed, just because leadership seasons evolve. And suddenly, the role you carried for years is no longer there. Nothing about your experience changed overnight, but something internally feels different. And that is when many leaders realize something unsettling: how much of their identity had quietly attached itself to the role. This moment happens far more often than people admit. And interestingly, research has been observing this phenomenon for decades. Helen Rose Ebert, in her work Becoming an X, The Process of Role Exit, found that when a role becomes central to a person's self-identity, leaving that role often feels less like a transition and more like an identity crisis. The problem is not simply losing the role. The problem is losing the identity attached to it. Many high-performing professionals carry a tension they rarely speak about. Externally, everything looks strong, but internally, pressure increases. Because when identity becomes tied to the title, several things begin to happen. Slowing down feels dangerous, because if you step back, a quiet question appears. Will I still be relevant? Delegation becomes uncomfortable. And in real life, many leaders secretly feel like they are slowly training their replacement. Not because leaders don't understand delegation, but because if someone else can do what built your reputation, it raises an uncomfortable question about your value. And transitions begin to feel threatening. Promotions, restructuring, career shift, they stop feeling like strategic decisions and start feeling like identity crisis. Research from the University of Maryland studying involuntary job loss found something similar. When people lose roles that strongly define them, they experience what researchers call identity discrepancies. In simple terms, the person you believe you are no longer matches the role you occupy. And that gap often produces distress, anxiety, disorientation, even depression, which explains something many leaders quietly feel but rarely articulate. Sometimes, the higher you climb, the more fragile success begins to feel. I experienced a version of this myself. After spending more than 14 years working and becoming a principal consultant and a data scientist, and eventually transitioning into leadership development as a Maxwell certified leadership coach, I encountered an unexpected moment of identity tension. For years, my professional identity had been shaped by analytical problem solving, consulting, data science, complex system thinking. Those roles carried credibility. They carried recognition. They carried reputation. And when I began transitioning toward leadership coaching and development, something surprising happened. Even though the transition was intentional, it still felt like I had lost something. Because when you carry a role long enough, it quietly becomes part of how you see yourself. And that realization forced me to confront a question many leaders eventually face. Who am I if a role changes? That experience led me back to two leadership principles John C. Maxwell teaches: The first is the law of awareness. Leaders must understand themselves before they can effectively lead others. Awareness reveals what is actually happening beneath the surface. The second is the law of the mirror. Simply stated, you cannot consistently outperform your self-perception. Your leadership will rarely rise above how you see yourself. Those two ideas force me to confront something deeper. My value could not be anchored in a professional role because responsibilities change, titles change, but identity must remain. For me personally, my faith reinforced this realization. For those who share a Christian perspective, there is a powerful line in Daniel 11:32. It says, "The people who know their God will stand firm and do great exploit." What struck me about that passage is the order. Identity comes first, then action follows. Strength flows from knowing who you are before stepping into what you do, because identity always precedes assignment. And that principle applies far beyond faith context. Leadership always becomes stronger when identity becomes clearer. The strongest leaders eventually learn to separate three things: title, responsibility, identity. Titles change, responsibilities evolve. Identity must remain stable, because when those three become fused together, leadership becomes fragile. Titles introduce you to the room. Identity sustains you in the room. And occasionally, identity is what keeps you calm when the meeting could have been an email. Research published in Regent University's Journal of Virtues and Leadership support this idea. Their studies found that leaders who anchor their identity in internal values, character, authenticity, moral clarity demonstrate healthier and more sustainable leadership across changing roles. Their authority doesn't collapse when the title changes, because their identity was never built on the title in the first place. Stable identity produces sustainable leadership. If these kinds of leadership questions resonate with you, the deeper issues beneath performance and success, consider subscribing. This channel explores the intersection of identity, leadership pressure, and long-term influence, because leadership conversations should go deeper than tactics. So, here is a quiet question worth asking yourself. If your organization removed your title tomorrow, would your sense of worth remain intact, or would something inside begin to collapse? Your answer reveals something important: whether leadership is grounded in identity or position. By now, I think I can safely assume ambition is not the problem. Achievement is not the problem. Leadership is meant to involve responsibility, pressure, and influence. But ambition without anchoring eventually becomes anxiety. And success without stability eventually becomes fragile. The goal of leadership is not simply to build a title. It is to build a person strong enough to carry responsibility without being consumed by it. Because eventually, every leader reaches the same moment: when the role changes, when the title shifts, when the problem evolves, and the only thing left is who you are. If you are interested in leadership conversations that help high-performing professionals build identities strong enough to pursue high achievement without sacrificing purpose, family, or legacy, you are in the right place. I look forward to exploring these ideas together in future conversations.